You're sitting in your own living room. The doors are locked, the lights are on. Nothing in this moment is actually wrong, and yet your shoulders haven't dropped in over an hour. Your breathing stays shallow, almost cautious, like you're bracing for something you can't name. Your stomach holds a quiet, persistent tightness that has no obvious source. If someone asked you right now, "What's wrong?" you might not have an answer. Logically, you know you're fine. There's no threat in this room, no emergency unfolding, but some part of you clearly didn't get that memo because your body keeps behaving as if danger is still somewhere nearby, just out of sight. This is one of the strangest experiences a person can have, feeling unsafe in a place that is, by every reasonable measure, completely safe. And it's far more common than most people admit out loud. You can check the locks twice. You can remind yourself nothing bad is happening. You can list point by point all the reasons you have nothing to fear. None of it fully lands. The tightness stays. Here's what makes this even more puzzling. This isn't usually about a specific fear you can point to. It's something quieter. A baseline hum of alertness running underneath an ordinary afternoon with no clear trigger and no obvious off switch. Most people assume this means something is wrong with their thinking, that if they could just reason their way out of it, the feeling would lift. But what if the problem isn't your thoughts at all? What if your mind is simply reporting on a decision your body already made somewhere else, without asking permission, without waiting for evidence? That distinction matters more than it sounds, because if your body decided you weren't safe before your mind ever got involved, then no amount of logical reassurance was ever going to be enough to override it. So here's the real question worth sitting with. If you are in every measurable way actually safe right now, why doesn't your brain believe it? That gap between the safety you can prove and the safety you can feel is exactly where this story begins. To understand that gap, picture an airport security checkpoint. The officers stationed there don't wait for a knife or a gun to actually appear before they act. Their entire job is scanning bags, faces, behavior, searching for anything that doesn't quite fit the pattern of normal. Most days, nothing happens. No real threat ever materializes. But the scanning never stops, because stopping is exactly what the job isn't allowed to do. Your brain runs a remarkably similar operation every hour of every day, usually below the level of conscious thought. The structure responsible for this is small, almond-shaped, and sits deep inside your brain. Researchers call it the amygdala. You don't need to remember the name, only the role it plays, constantly screening everything you see, hear, and feel for early signs of danger, long before your conscious mind has time to weigh in. Most of the time, this screening happens so quietly you never notice it at all. But for some people, especially after periods of prolonged stress, repeated overwhelm, or unresolved fear, that screening process becomes more sensitive than it needs to be. This is hypervigilance, a nervous system that has quietly adjusted its threshold, flagging too many ordinary moments as potential threats, even in a locked, quiet living room. Here's where it gets genuinely interesting. There are two very different kinds of safe. There's logical safety, the kind you can prove with facts, doors locked, no one around, nothing happening. And there's biological safety, the kind your nervous system decides on its own, using signals far older and far less interested in logic. Your amygdala doesn't read police reports or check statistics. It reads posture, breathing, subtle tension, unfamiliar sounds, even the pace of your own thoughts. This explains the disconnect perfectly. You can satisfy every condition of logical safety and still fail to satisfy biological safety because they're not even answering the same question. One asks, is there evidence of danger? The other asks something closer to, does this feel like the conditions where danger has shown up before? And that second question, it turns out, isn't really about right now at all. It's about everything that came before it, which raises the question that actually explains most of this. Why would a nervous system start treating an ordinary, harmless moment like a checkpoint in the first place? That question has an answer, and it starts with something your brain is doing constantly without your awareness: predicting. Your nervous system isn't just reacting to the present moment, it's running a continuous forecast built entirely from past experience, trying to answer one question ahead of time. What's likely to happen next? This is survival learning, and it's remarkably efficient. A brain that waits to confirm danger before responding is often too slow to matter. A brain that predicts danger in advance, even imperfectly, gives you a head start. Under ordinary circumstances, the system calibrates itself reasonably well. But chronic stress changes the calibration. When someone lives through repeated periods of overwhelm, unpredictability, or prolonged tension, work pressure that never lets up, a relationship that feels unstable, a health scare, a string of difficult years, the nervous system starts collecting data, and it draws a conclusion that feels, to it, perfectly reasonable. This is what life is like now. Stay ready. From that point forward, your brain isn't just available to detect danger, it's actively expecting it. The same way you might instinctively brace before a door you already know creaks loudly. Once a prediction is strong enough, it stops waiting for new evidence. It starts acting on the old evidence automatically, applying it to situations that have nothing to do with where that evidence originally came from. This is why a quiet living room can suddenly feel unsafe with no clear trigger. Your nervous system isn't analyzing this specific room, it's running an old forecast built from a different chapter of your life, applied automatically to a moment that doesn't actually match it. Safety, in this light, isn't something your brain refuses to recognize out of stubbornness. It's something that's become harder to recognize because the prediction model running underneath your awareness was trained on a harder season. And here's what makes this both unsettling and oddly encouraging at the same time. None of this was a conscious decision. You didn't choose to expect danger in safe places. Your brain learned it the way it learns almost everything, through repetition, without asking your permission first. But if your nervous system learned to predict danger automatically through nothing more than repeated experience, can it also learn to predict safety the same way? That question changes everything about how we understand what happens next. There's a common assumption worth questioning directly. Most people believe their anxious thoughts are the cause of how they feel. Racing thoughts, worst-case scenarios, that looping "what if?" Surely that's where the tightness in your chest comes from. But the science points in a different direction, and it's more important than it sounds. In many cases, the body responds first and the mind explains afterward. Your nervous system shifts into alertness. A faster heartbeat, tighter muscles, a subtle bracing through your shoulders, often before any specific thought has even formed. Then, almost instantly, your mind notices that physical state and goes looking for a reason. It rarely comes back empty-handed. It finds a deadline, a relationship worry, an old memory, something to explain a feeling that biologically had already begun. This is one of the more disorienting features of anxiety. The thought usually feels like the beginning of the story. It isn't. It's closer to a caption added after the photograph was already taken. Think of an old car alarm that's grown too sensitive. It doesn't wait for someone to break in. A slammed door 2 cars away, a low-flying plane, even a sudden gust of wind can set it off. The alarm isn't malfunctioning randomly. It's responding exactly the way it was calibrated to respond. The trigger doesn't need to make sense from the outside. It only needs to match some fragment of a pattern the system once learned to treat as risk. Your body can work the same way. The tightness, the shallow breathing, the restless energy, these often aren't responses to your current thoughts. They're the alarm going off first, based on an old, oversensitive calibration. Your mind then steps in afterward, doing what minds do best, building a coherent explanation around a feeling that was never waiting for permission. This reordering matters enormously because it explains why "just think positive" or "stop worrying" so rarely works. You cannot out-argue an alarm with logic because the alarm was never listening to logic in the first place. It was listening to your body. Your brain isn't betraying you in any of this. It's running protective software written during a harder time, applying it loyally to a present that no longer requires it. So if the body moves first and the mind explains second, what does that mean for the way thoughts themselves spiral out of control once they begin? Let's return to that living room. Doors locked. Nothing wrong. A body that wouldn't quite believe it by now. That contradiction should feel less like a mystery and more like something you can actually explain. Your nervous system wasn't malfunctioning in that moment. It was running a prediction built from real experience, applied to a present that no longer matched it. The tightness in your chest wasn't evidence that something is wrong with you. It was evidence of a system still operating on outdated information that at some point was genuinely useful. This is worth sitting with for a moment because it quietly rewrites the entire story. Your brain isn't trying to make your life harder. It isn't malfunctioning and it isn't broken. It's protecting you faithfully using a forecast written during a different chapter, one where staying alert may have actually mattered. The problem was never that your brain cared too little. It's that it kept caring in the same way long after the original danger passed. That single shift in understanding changes how the entire experience feels. Anxiety stops being a personal failing you need to overcome through sheer willpower. It becomes something closer to outdated software. Not evidence of weakness, but evidence of a system that learned its lessons too well, in a season that no longer applies. You cannot argue your way out of a prediction. But predictions, like everything else the nervous system learns, can eventually be updated through new, consistent experience. You don't need to have all the answers about how that update happens to feel the weight lift slightly from a question that's probably followed you for a long time. What if nothing is wrong with me? What if your body has simply been doing its job with old instructions in a present it hasn't fully recognized yet? That's not a small realization. It's the foundation everything else gets built on. But one question still remains. If your brain keeps predicting danger before you've even had a conscious thought, why do those thoughts, once they start, become so difficult to stop? That's exactly what we'll explore next. If this changed the way you understand your own anxiety, consider subscribing. There's more of this conversation ahead.